Bergkamp. Dennis Bergkamp.
Persie, ja! Ja! Ja!
Daar is hij. Ja! Ja!
Daar is Klaassen, goal!
Hello, it's podcast 61 from Football-Oranje, your home of Dutch football. I'm Michael Statham and I'm with Jonathan Beck, our special guest today, who is an English language commentator on Eredivisie games. We're going to discuss the Europa League and Champions League games involving Ajax, PSV, Feyenoord, RZ. Also, the reaction to the Eredivisie, PSV won, Ajax won, Feyenoord continue to struggle. You're listening to us on YouTube, iTunes, SoundCloud, Football Nation Radio. Make sure you give us a like wherever you're listening and subscribe too. Enjoy. Jonathan, thank you for joining me. We really appreciate you joining us on Football-Oranje. And you were commentating for IMG Media for PSV 1, Ajax 1. Your commentary was broadcast across the whole world. What did you make of it?
I was really enjoyed the intensity. I have to say, Michael, thanks for having me on. It was one of those games that, because it's the first one between the big three, everyone's looking forward to it. Everyone, players, fans, watchers, managers, everyone is basically trying to see where each team sits. Because both have had a great week in Europe. Both have come through match days one, having scored 3 goals and got the first victory. Both began the season with a draw and then have won the other games. PSV have certainly improved over the last few weeks. So I think everybody was keen to see, can they measure up against Ajax? They hadn't been beaten at home for 50 league games, stretching back more than 3 years. So that was on the line. The intensity was good early on. I really enjoyed the fact that there was a little bit of edge to it. There was a bit of pushing and shoving between Ziyech and Sadilek, which showed the passion, and the fans were really up for it, as you'd expect on a game like that. And I really enjoyed watching this young PSV side, as well as Ajax, who seem to be the benchmark now when it comes to passing and free-flow football. There was the first 3 minutes, I have to say, was sort of reminiscent of the 1974 World Cup final, where Ajax just kept the ball, and like the Dutch did against the Germans, and then won a penalty. They just kept the ball for like 3 minutes without PSV even being able to touch it or get a sniff of it, and it was incredible. It didn't come to anything, but it was fantastic to watch Ajax do that in Eindhoven. And then Promes should have scored before half-time, which might have put a different slant on the game. He did eventually score with a nicely taken goal in the second half. And then for the first time in a long time, Ajax were opened up right down the middle. Great run from deep from Daniel Marland, played in by Gakpo, and he scores again. 7 goals in 3 games. He's the league's leading marksman. And the stories will carry on. You got the headlines for scoring 5 against Vitesse. Inevitably, you get British tabloids thinking that suddenly Arsenal are going to buy him back, having sold him for $500,000, and that somebody else is going to buy him. But I thought it was refreshing to see Bommel make a change and for it to pay off with Gakpo setting him up. And you don't see Ajax opened up like that too often, not down the middle. So all in all, I predicted a draw. I predicted a 2-2 draw in advance. I thought a draw was probably about right. Based on the first half, I had expected more goals. I don't know about you, but it kind of felt at half-time that the most surprising thing was that it was 0-0. So I would probably say a draw was about right. Ajax top on goal difference, PSV behind them now. And I think what we've seen is that both sides could do really, really well this year, and it's going to be very difficult for anybody to get close to them. Yeah,
your point about perhaps expecting a few more goals. Personally, I thought that was because Ajax were lacking a little bit in sharpness today in attack. We've seen them be a lot more deadly. And yes, whilst there's some really good playing, you mentioned that possession and the interplay that we were seeing, which was great and very typical of Ajax. They lacked a little bit of sharpness in and around the final third today. I think just making those bigger chances to make PSV really sweat. I still would say that Yudunza was perhaps PSV's man of the match. He had some things to do, and Ajax perhaps can count themselves a little bit unfortunate not to come away with a win. I think that this game goes to show yet again that Ajax are the favourites to win the Eredivisie this season, though, because even though PSV were home, Ajax seem to be having the better of possession and in terms of making chances. Although that's happened in the past, hasn't it, Jonathan, where PSV have been at home and not seen much of the ball, but managed to beat Ajax at home. in some previous cases that has been in vain because PSV have still come runners up in the title race. But yeah, I think PSV deserve that draw in the end though because of the endeavour they showed, and some of the play that Ihatala and Marlon were showing today was great. And the goal was fully deserved for Marlon, yet again showing that he's a player with form and is going to progress this season. Yeah, I think some of these links with Arsenal are very premature, but I think that by the end of the season he will be justifying his links to these bigger clubs. And yeah, Marlon is certainly a player in progression, and I look forward to seeing him play more for the Netherlands as well, because next season we could be seeing him, after a successful Euro 2020 perhaps, going to a much bigger club than PSV.
Yeah, it's a good statement from PSV, giving him the number 9 when Luc de Jong left. Scoring on his debut when he came on as a sub for the Netherlands was a fantastic way to introduce himself. I mean, I know players like Vincent Janssen did that as well, coming on and coming to prominence. But he made a very big step to England probably too soon and wasn't able to make that step up from RZ to Spurs. Marlon's already been in England, didn't break through at Arsenal, has come back having left the Ajax Academy. And, he bided his time last year to where a lot of the time he came on, he was played wide, wasn't he? He came on as an impact sub and played, someone he did play down the middle. Luc de Jong was sort of dropped into a number 10 role, strangely, towards the end of last season, but often he came on wide. So Van Bommel has been quite good with him in terms of easing him in gently and not placing too much expectation on him. The same with Ihatala, you have to say, only came to prominence really in January, and he's had half a season before this, but the hype around him was huge. He played across midfield, he tested him out right and left to try and fit in holding midfielders as well. He played him in the front three occasionally. So he's had a very good football education under Van Bommel, to the point where I think he now feels, the manager, that he can play that creative role. And at the age of 17, he was bossing the game against Sporting. He was man of the match, 2 assists, a wonderful one for Marlon's first goal. And he's a real find, and the question now with him, in a way with Sergino Dest, which you can come on to as well in a moment, is where will he go? He's from Moroccan descent, born in the Netherlands. Will he choose the Dutch? Will he choose Morocco? We've had this situation before when Danny Blind was in charge with Hakim Ziyech, who was called up and then not called up and then not used, and eventually he plumped for Morocco, and he's one that really got away from the Dutch FA, so they won't want to make the same mistake again.
No, that's right. It's a very special player is in the making there, just 17 years old. But yeah, aside from Ihatala and Marlon, and around that, PSV today weren't showing much quality in the middle of the park for me. What did you make of Rosario with Hendricks in midfield? Is this a midfield that's going to win the Eredivisie title and really challenge in the Europa League this season?
I don't know. It's difficult to see. Like you touched on before, Ajax not being sharp, which is probably true. I mean, although Promes missed a great chance, and Tadic at the end of the first half could have played in Neres instead of going himself. They could have had 3 without looking as sharp as they were. I would say the same about PSV. But in flashes, there was pace on the break with Bergwijn and Ihatala, but they were largely kept quiet, and they tried to mirror Ajax, I think, with that too. PSV have had usually a 1 holding and then 2 ahead of them. Today, I think Rosario and Hendricks were both that bit deeper, sort of mirroring what Alvarez and Martinez were doing for Ajax. And I don't know whether that just gives them less to play between the lines. It meant that, I suppose, more space for Ihatala to move around between the lines, and he did that quite well. But I don't know. I don't think they'll play that way against the lesser lights in the division. I'm not sure if it gives them enough creativity in midfield, to be honest. Bruno Pereiro's missing, injured, and usually has a great game against Ajax. His previous stats of assists and goals in these games will tell you that. And I know he's drifted in and out of favour under Van Bommel, with Ihatala preferred it sometimes last year. But I just think, I don't think that is the way forward. Maybe in the bigger games against Ajax, it provides the extra screen. But I would like to see PSV with just one of them in there, whether that's Hendricks or Rosario.
Just one final note on this game, Jonathan, before we move on to other matters. I'd like to get your opinion on Mark van Bommel as a whole and how you think he's done with PSV so far this season, because at the start of the campaign he came in for a lot of criticism, didn't he? It seemed as though he was starting to turn results around. We saw a 5-0 win against Vitesse and then a 3-2 win over Sporting Lisbon in the Europa League in midweek, which we'll come on to shortly. But yeah, a draw today with Ajax. Does that keep the sort of positivity around Van Bommel, or do you think that some of his decisions were questionable today?
I think it keeps the optimism. Yeah, I have to say it's they have this remarkable record which predates him, going back 3 and a bit years to the point where Feyenoord were the last team to beat them in September 2016 at home in the league. So they've made it 51 games now, and I think he has. He's drawing at Twente on the opening weekend was clearly a surprise to many. The way Twente played since then up to Friday, it's looked not so much a fluke on their behalf, because they've played really, really well. I think he's had to do a little bit more rejigging and rebuilding perhaps than Erik ten Hag has. He's lost Lozano, which was a big player for him. He lost Angelino, which gave them so much on the left-hand side in terms of coming forward. Boscaglia, he dropped today for a more defensive Sadilek, who's nominally a midfielder but has played there at the start of the season before Boscaglia came in. And when they needed an equaliser, he threw him on as an attacking option. But he's had to, the balance of the side with Dumfries on one side and Angelino on the other was affected by the Spaniard's departure back to Manchester City. So that's taken time to remedy. The partnership with Lozano then, is broken up, and they get a lot of money for him to go to Napoli, which is fine. But Bruma, takes time to settle to come in. Gakpo came on and made a change today. So, yeah, they've got the options there. He's tried out Bergwijn as a 10 already rather than playing wide, although he was back in that wide role today. So he's had a few problems to wrestle with and, key players to manage to fix and fit in. So it's probably not a surprise that it's taken him a little bit of time to get that kind of balance right. In the same way, I suppose Ten Hag has not so much stumbled on a solution, but he's bought 2 centre-halves who have now turned into 2 excellent midfielders in Martinez and Alvarez. When Donny van de Beek is back, how he fits Donny in, along with Quincy Promes as well, and keeps David Neres happy, then we'll have to see. But yeah, I think they both had problems to deal with, and Van Bommel had early issues with losing to Basel, which was one of the tougher draws they could have got in the second qualifying round, which meant that they are now obviously following the Europa League path. So they had a lot of big games early on, and the same as Ajax, they had to get the personnel ready and make sure they qualified for European tournaments to help the coefficient, to help their own season. So I would say all in all, it's a positive, the draw today. I think he'll look on it that way. They're still level with Ajax. They're only behind on goal difference. So going forward, I think, they'll have a positive outlook.
I think when you break it down, like you have there, Jonathan, I think you've got a good point about Mark van Bommel. It's easy to be negative when you see a string of poor results. But yeah, both managers, Ten Hag and Van Bommel, have had problems to contend with. And it's like the same for all Dutch sides. They need to readjust given the sales departures, and with the new players, they have to bed them in and get them used to the style of play. And it may just be as simple as that for both managers, that they've had to readjust everything that their side was about. I know Ajax are reeling from the sales of De Ligt and De Jong, and they've adjusted now. And I think there's a little bit more fluidity about their style of play. They no longer rely on De Jong to make the play. Let's move on to actually talking a bit more about Ajax there, because you mentioned Alvarez and Martinez as that sort of midfield duo for Ajax, when they were largely expected to be the new centre-back duo. In midweek, Ajax recorded their first win of the Champions League campaign over Lille. What did you make of the performance then, Jonathan? Because again, you were busy commentating on that match, and you again got to see Alvarez and Martinez in the middle of the park. Was that vital in the victory, or do you think that's something that Ten Hag still got to work on? Because he's been changing his defence and midfield quite a lot in the early stages of the season.
He has. Blint started in there before Alvarez was able to come. I mean, he's had a pretty much non-stop summer, Alvarez, with the Gold Cup and then the transfer and coming in. So he gave him time, Ten Hag, to acclimatise. He took him to the games. He took him abroad in the Champions League qualifiers without playing him. And now he's had a little bit more of a pre-season and a break, and he's got up to speed. So I think he looks the real deal. And I know he was bought. That deal was lined up. They knew De Ligt was going. That deal was lined up and announced in the days after he went. Martinez was more of an auxiliary purchase, if you like. But at €7 million, he looks real snip. He looks like an excellent player, and he started at centre half. He's played every game so far. And he really does look the real deal. His left foot is brilliant when it comes to those diagonal balls to try and find Ziyech or Neres on the flanks. I do think that's going forward going to be the partnership that they want. Alvarez has played in midfield and did so for Mexico internationally, and did the end of last season when they bought him from Club America. So they scouted him as a centre half, and then when they carried on watching him last season, more and more he was playing in midfield. So Ten Hag knew he could do that. Whether or not he saw him or Razvan Marin as the long-term successor this season to Frankie de Jong, I don't know. Marin started off in there, but hasn't really featured at all. He was about to come on because they thought Daley Blind was injured in the game today. And then he didn't manage to get on at all because Blind managed to shake off whatever it was, the problem he had. So I think they provide a really good screen. You have Martinez, who sits a little deeper, and Alvarez, who's able to get forward, as we saw, to great effect when he scored the second goal against Lille. And he just provides that calmness on the ball that Daley Blind was providing in there. And when you play against teams that sit a little deeper, then Blind is almost a midfielder on his own. We saw against Apoel and Pauk, who was sitting so deep that he was able to dictate things from the halfway line as well and come in. So I think the Lille game was going forward was very encouraging. Erik ten Hag was very realistic that they gave too many chances away on the counter-attack, and he'd already cited the threat that they had coming forward with Victor Osimhen, the new striker, who really, on another day, might have found himself with 2 goals, and it might have been a different kind of outlook on the game. Onana got the man of the match and put in a decent performance with good saves at the right time. I think everyone acknowledged Ajax deserved to win, but Ten Hag also acknowledged that if they gave PSV that many chances and that sort of open space, then they'd exploit them. He was also talking about the too many tricks and flicks. He's very pragmatic. He wants tricks and flicks for the right end result. When he was moaning at too many back heels going astray and giving the ball away, which is a cardinal sin for him. He applauded the pirouettes from Martinez and from Sergino Dest during the game, but he was well aware also that there was a few too many fancy Dan moves that were going astray. But I think overall, Lille will trouble the likes of Valencia and Chelsea. I can't see them being beaten every game. They came second in the French league and they have lost their best players. But at the same time, they could easily have scored once or twice. And I don't think anybody would have complained too much had Ajax won 3-2 based on the balance of chances. So I think they'll give other teams a threat, particularly at home. And Ajax have been very fortunate to keep a clean sheet and to beat them 3-0 on the opening day. Still, it bodes well if they can now go to Valencia match day 2 and pick up at least a draw. And then, Ajax followed up a great opening win last season against AEK Athens with a 1-1 draw away in Munich at Bayern. So who's to say they can't go to Valencia and get at least a draw, and then they're well set for the home game against Chelsea.
Indeed, there will be. I'd like to open our questions from Twitter for this podcast. One of them here is about Ajax. It's from Abdul. He says, does Ajax have a chance to win first place in their Champions League group? And I guess based on the evidence we saw against Lille, that yes, they do have a chance because this group it's really open. That win over Lille was a very good one, but it does show that Ajax still have a few concerns defensively. But I think in the spirit of Ajax and Ten Hag, they just trust the fact that they are going to play their own way and simply outscore the opponent. But I think the answer to this lies within the ties against Valencia and Chelsea. Obviously, the next 3 games, Valencia away, then Chelsea home and away, they're going to be the vital games, aren't they? And that will determine whether Ajax can be first place in the group. Are you confident that they'll qualify, Jonathan, first of all?
I think they can. I'm confident that they'll qualify. I mean, I've seen plenty of reviews when the groups were made that had Ajax in first place and Chelsea in second. I'm not sure about that. I mean, Chelsea are one of the better teams that they could have faced out of pot one when you consider the opposition that they might have been drawn against, and when you consider some of the other groups, particularly Barcelona, Bayern, Barcelona, Dortmund, and Inter Milan, which would have been a very, very difficult group indeed to go into. But they were protected a little bit being in pot two, but they could easily have had Inter Milan out of pot three instead of Valencia, and they could have had Leipzig, instead of Lille out of pot four. I would say Leipzig and Lille were two of the strongest teams in pot four, but Leipzig have already shown domestically and in Europe that they're going to be a difficult team to play against as well. So when it was made, I was fairly happy with the draw. I thought Valencia were a good side, but not insurmountable. They went to Chelsea and did very, very well. They were lucky not to concede from the penalty spot, obviously, but I have a feeling that they could. Ajax, and once we've seen how Ajax perform in Amsterdam against Chelsea on match day 3, I think I'll have a more confident outlook, because Chelsea at the moment are still a work in progress under Frank Lampard. They can score goals as they showed against Wolves, and then they lose to Chelsea. They lose to Liverpool today, which is not a surprise. Most teams lose to Liverpool at the moment, but they gave it a really good go in the second half, and they might have got something out of that game. So yes, they could top the group. They'll need a bit of luck. They could have topped the group last year, of course, and came second just behind Bayern after those draws. So, well, we'll see. I would say at the moment, I think they might be in second behind Chelsea. But it's as you say, those back-to-back match days are going to be key, and it really does depend who you play. I think it might be advantageous for Chelsea to have Ajax and vice versa in those two, because they're considered the strongest two. So we'll see how things look after match day 4.
Yeah, we'll have a much clearer idea then after those ties for Ajax against Chelsea. Just a little hint for future listeners. We've got another podcast coming up next weekend, but also Jonathan and I are hoping to meet in Amsterdam after the Chelsea match. Many exciting things coming up for Football-Oranje listeners. Sticking with Ajax, there's a question from Cam, and he says, ultimately, which country do you see Sergino Dest playing for? Now, the Ajax right-back has been in the media stating that he's sort of torn between USA and the Netherlands, and he wants to keep his options open for now. I think it's clear to say that the USA are the inferior side for Netherlands, and therefore are more demanding of getting Dest into the side. He's been called up already for the USA. But I think the Netherlands could certainly do with another right-back option, given Karsdorp's return to fitness has been slow, and even though he's getting there, he's not yet a first-team option. Denzel Dumfries is a very good right-back for PSV, but easy cut out for international level. So Dest might well be an answer. He's very young, but someone that Koeman could certainly develop. I think that if Koeman sets his stall out to get Dest, then he can grab him. Although I was going to say this, Jonathan, that I saw something on Twitter last week about these flyers being sent out to American Ajax fans, and it had Dest on the sort of cover of it, and there was a few sort of motivational quotes about playing football for Ajax, and it just looked as though Dest was being the poster boy for USA Ajax fans, which you kind of expect. But then does that actually drop a hint that Dest is interested in playing for the USA? Maybe it's something Ajax can latch onto if he does choose the USA, as it's a sort of marketable option. It's a very interesting thought about why he might choose for the USA, but it could well be that sways him that way if he's an outpost for American Ajax fans.
Potentially. And it's interesting that he's come to prominence this season. At the start of the season, he's forced his way in through his performances. Last year he was playing under 19 football, and then he broke into the reserve team. It's been a really stellar few months for him, and he hasn't been on the Dutch radar when it comes to youth teams. He's not played under 17, under 19 level at all, and now he's broken into the Ajax team. They've kind of woken up to the fact that he's there and he's available, and now they're trying to get him. But the Americans have shown much more interest. He played at the Under-20 World Cup, did very well with them. Now he's got full international honours, albeit both of the games he played in September were friendlies. So, players can be swayed undoubtedly by the fact that, the country tries hard to get them. He was born in Alkmaar in the Netherlands. He's got a parent from each country. It may be the case that, the US have invested more in him as a player. They've saw the talent in him and they've taken him at under 20 level. That, he might want to repay that. So until he plays a competitive international, then we'll see. And it has to be resolved quickly, obviously, as you know, because he'll be called up again for the next international window in October, I'm sure. And then, it'll be a case of when he makes his choice, because if he does, then he plumps for the USA and they'll play a competitive game, and then he'll be an international for them.
I think ultimately, as an answer to Cam's question, we both feel that he may choose the USA, but yeah, it's so open to debate at the moment, and Koeman's got a lot of work to do with getting quite a few players to choose the Netherlands who are impressing at the age that they are now, where there's a lot of teenagers that he needs to try and get locked down to play for the Dutch national team. A final question on sort of Ajax and Champions League matters before we move on is from Sats Mundin, and he says, what are your feelings on Matthijs de Ligt? Do you feel he made the wrong choice going to Juventus with a different style of defending? Do you think he will adjust? And do you still believe that he will become world-class there? Now, Jonathan, you are, again, a very busy man with your commentating, and you got to watch de Ligt play for Juventus in the Champions League. What are your thoughts?
He was, that was all looking good for Juventus. In Madrid against Atletico, 2-0 up. And then they came back. They never know when they're beating Atletico Madrid. It's difficult, if he'd been partnering Chiellini, who's more experienced, although Leonardo Bonucci is a very experienced defender as well and wearing the captain's armband now for Juventus. It's interesting the way that the partnership's going to work, because he will now be partnering Bonucci with Chiellini's long-term injury, which means he's come in even though he began the season on the bench. I think he'll be okay. None of us really know what his choices were over the summer. Everyone assumes that he had the option to go to Barcelona. It's been talked about so much. It's been almost stated as fact that he simply had to say yes, and there he was, along with Frankie, his good mate. The case is, it might not have been the deal he wanted. It might not have been the deal that materialised at all. He might have been told he could come, but he'd have no guarantee of first-team football. He'd be behind Barcelona's current centre-halves. So, we don't know whether he chose Juventus for which reason. He says it was because Italians are renowned for defending, and he wants to make sure he can learn from the likes of Bonucci and Chiellini and Maurizio Sarri, who's now in charge. So I think his game will grow positionally. He's going to be he's still very much a work in progress, 20 years old. He's going to have plenty to learn, and he looks great in the Eredivisie. He looks composed for much of the time during Netherlands games, but he can only improve in a side like Juventus when you have a goalkeeper like Buffon there as well, who can help in terms of positioning and when it comes to set pieces and those kind of things. I think it's a good choice for him, and he would have been well advised. His agent's a strong one and a good one. And when it comes to making that step and knowing that you're going to play week in, week out, which he will do now, which he wasn't guaranteed to do at Barcelona, had that even been a deal in the offing, then and he'll come up against different kind of strikers in the Italian league to the ones he was coming up against in the Eredivisie. He will certainly come up against very differently organised back lines. There's a real prevalence for three at the back in a lot of the teams, and wide attacking players from full-back and from providing width from overlapping full-backs and midfield. So I think he'll have plenty to deal with, and I think it will be a good move for him, to be honest, and we'll have to wait and see. Now he's cemented his place, albeit through Chiellini's injury. We'll wait and see how things develop across the next few months, because the Italian season is still really only 3 games old.
Yeah, there's a lot of time to go for de Ligt. That he'll be given a good few months to adjust to the Italian style of play. He will be world class for Juventus. I'm sure of it. It just may take a little bit more time. I hope that his confidence isn't too knocked by the start he's had in Italy, and he can just move on from it. Let's move on to talk about Feyenoord. One of the sort of hot topics Dutch football at the minute, given their results in Europe and in the Eredivisie. Jaap Stam, for me, I know he was receiving a bit of criticism in the early games of the season, but I think he was starting to turn it around for Feyenoord. They were starting to bed in some of their new players. Even their free transfers seem to be starting to have an effect. Leroy Fer, for me, was one of the signings of the summer in the Eredivisie. But, they had a difficult game against Rangers. I think they were highly overrun in the first half of their 1-0 defeat in Scotland. It could have been more before half-time. And then second half final were a lot better on the ball. But it wasn't to be. And the quality in the final third just wasn't there. We were recording on a Sunday. Today they drew with Emmen 3-3. And it took a last-minute equaliser from Jens Toornstra to keep the unbeaten record, which isn't a great unbeaten record at the minute, is it? Given that they can't seem to win many games in the Eredivisie when they should, be beating a lot of these lower teams.
I honestly don't know what to make of them. I saw them against Utrecht when it was 1-1 and they were very, very shaky at the back. I have to say, much more shaky than I thought. Yeah, he came on and he didn't do too badly today. He didn't seem to have done much wrong. Senesi came on. By all accounts, I didn't see all the game, but by all accounts, he didn't have the greatest of performances. But a friend of mine, Richard Connolly, who was commentating on it, likened it to Lisandro Magazan being thrown in by Ajax in the Klassiker and then losing 6-2 last season. So it wasn't an ideal baptism for him. I'm really not sure what to make of them. The opening 3 draws was strange for Stam. In Europe, they couldn't stop scoring, but in the domestic league, they were really struggling to impose themselves on games. They have Jurgensen now coming back from injury, which is fine. They missed him, certainly as a target man in the last few weeks in the opening games because they've obviously let Dylan Venter go off on loan, so they didn't have him as an option either. Using Narsing as an out-and-out striker didn't really work in the same way that it has worked for Tadic at Ajax. But yeah, Fer has a good signing. Narsing's a good signing wide. Sam Larsson's a decent deputy wide on the right. I can't work out why things haven't been going for them. I know Steven Berghuis missed through injury the last time. I'm not sure if he was playing today, to be honest. But he's the real key for them because if he's not on form or if he's not even there, then they do really struggle to create things. But don't think anybody would have expected them not to beat Emmen, even though Emmen are at home, and they managed 1 win so far. But to lose a 2-0 lead in Emmen is very surprising indeed. It's going to give cause for concern, I think. Certainly, some people felt that Stam was too negative as a coach. As a defender, he would sort things out defensively, but not be able to give them the style going forward. It looks like they haven't. They're anything but solid defensively as well. So I'm not really sure as to how much the players have taken to him.
There seemed to be early optimism surrounding Stam, but you have to look at where he's come from as well. He didn't set the world alight with Pek Zwolle, and he was sacked by Reading after having one good season with them. I hope that he can turn it around because Stam's was a great player and we all want him to succeed as a manager. But yeah, I agree. It's hard to figure out, isn't it, Jonathan, how they just can't seem to make it click at the moment. One of the questions we received actually was to ask whether they can still qualify for the next round of the Europa League. Just after that first game, it didn't look like that they were going to. But it doesn't look like they're going to have much of a chance at the moment. They've got Young Boys and Porto also in their group, who for me will be too strong for Feyenoord. I think the home games in Dugout will be important, but I don't see them qualifying.
No, it's difficult. It's a tough group. Porto are a Champions League standard opposition. You'd expect them to do well, even though they did fall into the Europa League, having not made it into the Champions League. Young Boys, they've been in the Champions League recently as well. So you have to say it's difficult. They have to win the home games, or they have to at least get something from the home games, and then hope that they can, maybe get. So I can't see any way they can top the group. They have to, I think, hope for winning their home games and then taking something away. But Rangers away was going to be, arguably on paper at least, the easier of the 3 away games. So we'll have to wait and see.
One other team was in Europa League action this last week for the Netherlands, and it was RZ, who had a 2-2 draw with Partizan Belgrade. Now, neither of us managed to watch the game, but it was, of course, watched by many Partizan Belgrade fans who were children. They filled the stadium when it was meant to be an empty one. I think that may well be in the favour of Partizan, but, a decent draw nonetheless for RZ, considering they went down to 10 men. What have you made of RZ this season, and have you enjoyed watching them as much as I have?
They're always great to watch going forward, aren't they? And particularly this season with Idrissi and Stengs and Bordeaux. They're going to cause a lot of teams a lot of problems. It was only the final penalty goal last week from Cope Miners that wasn't one of their 12 goals that actually had Stengs, Idrissi or Bordeaux involved in. They've been such a magnificent front three. Yeah, defensively, they can be a little bit haphazard. We've seen some shock results. We've seen them, really destroy teams going forward. It could be another, Arne Slot still finding his feet in the head coach role, with John van der Brom going to Utrecht, or another side wrestling with the inconsistency. But I think they'll be there or thereabouts when it comes to Europa League places again. Van der Brom has left an excellent legacy. Bordeaux, if he can stay clear of injury, Stengs too, will be very, very key players. And Idrissi is now adding goals to his game. He's always been a great winger, but he's now adding the end product as well. So when you add to that the fact that Court Miners has stepped up, he's still very young, but he's wearing the captain's armband now. Kustil has gone to Spartak Moscow. It's that looked like being a big hole to fill. But so far, they've done well to cope without Till.
I agree. I almost think they've done better without him, because they haven't had to try and rely on his goal-scoring efforts. He started to get to a point where he was missing a lot of chances for RZ. But, he was still a good player in their build-up, and I don't think they've done too bad in replacing Till with Danny de Wit from Ajax. But, yeah, their front three is electric. And the most surprising stat for me is that RZ actually have the best Eredivisie defence at the moment. They've only conceded 3 goals. Not something you associate with them at all, is it?
Yeah, they should. Still provide the entertainment. I do worry about Flyer and Stein Woutens as a defensive pair. They're not exactly pacey, and they were found out very early on in the last game prior to today when they beat Ardo. But they got away with it. They bounced back after conceding the early goal. And Fleur made an uncharacteristic error for him. As you say, that was only the third they conceded. And up to today, when PSV conceded, they and PSV were the joint best defences in the league, and now it's RZ out on their own. So yeah, it should be another good season for them. And fingers crossed they can get the stadium fixed up. And we know they're sharing with Ardo up to Christmas, but after that, let's hope they can go back home.
Too right. One last question for you, Jonathan, before the end of our podcast today. Has anything else caught your eye recently in the Eredivisie? I couldn't help but notice that Vitesse were near the top of the league, which is good for them considering they're often an inconsistent side.
Yeah, there was a lot of talk in the summer about the fact that this could be their year to challenge for the top 4. And the way they started, certainly drawing with Ajax, was a good omen. The one outlier in terms of results really was that crazy 5-0 defeat to PSV when Marlon scored all 5 goals. But if you take that out of the equation, which seems to have been just an incredible off day, then yeah, until today they were top of the league, albeit having played 2 games more before PSV and Ajax came together today. So this could be a good year for them to challenge for the top 4. I always remember when Merab Jordania first took charge. He's now since departed the club, but his aim was to turn them into a Champions League club and a club that's challenging the traditional Big Three for the title. That hasn't materialised. They've had a number of good starts over the last 10 years, and they've always fallen away, and more often than not qualified for the Europa League playoffs, which then puts you in the second qualifying round, which leaves you a long passage, as Ajax found out last year, through to the group stage. So this could be, they've lost Vyacheslav Karavayev, who's gone to Russia, back to Russia. But, that he is a player that they will struggle to replace, and they haven't quite, with Lelyveld, managed to get the same calibre in there as yet. But again, going forward, they've got quality. Berrio seems to be decent in midfield and he's chipping in with a goal or two. Brian Linson always seems to be good for double figures, 10 or 12 goals. And Tim Matthijs is still able to put them away as well. So, yeah, I've got high hopes for Vitesse this season when it comes to a top 4, top 5 place.
Fair enough. Jonathan, thank you again for joining me on the Football-Oranje podcast. Always great to have you back. You, of course, featured on our Eredivisie predictions feature on the website as well this week. So thank you very much for that. And for listeners, we've got another podcast coming next week. Thank you very much for listening and joining us today. If you give us a like, if you enjoyed the podcast, and subscribing on our platforms, wherever you are. And we'll speak to you very soon.
Dennis Bergkamp! Dennis Bergkamp!
Ja!
Daar is hij! Ja! Ja!
Daar is Klaassen, goal!